Hey guys, welcome back to part 2 of the Sifu review. Last time we talked about several aspects of the gameplay. And now we're going to talk about the enemies, the bosses, the music, the graphics, the level design and challenges. And finally, the game's ending. Now let's start by talking about the enemies. As you might have noticed by the videos in the last part, a lot of them have very distinct looks, with different designs and clothes depending on the level. But they come in 5 categories, which are henchmen, juggernaut, flash kicks, disciples, and bodyguards. This avoids making the enemies of each category to look like clones of each other like in other more old-school beat-em-ups. But because of this, it might be a bit difficult to notice which enemy is a henchman, disciples or flash kick, etc. But eventually you will be able to tell them apart just by looking at their stance and moveset. Also, some enemies of the same category might be far stronger than the rest. They all don't have the exact same power level. This makes the enemies feel more varied despite the fact that there is only 5 categories. Here is a small summary of each of the different categories of enemy types. Henchmen. These are the most common and basic type of enemies. They usually come in groups and their moves are very telegraphed, which makes them very easy to avoid or parry. So like I said before, they usually are not a real threat and most of the time you will use them to refill your own health. Though you shouldn't get too overconfident since you will have to make sure they don't gang up on you or corner you.
Drop your weapon!
Also, this enemy type tends to pick up weapons way more often than the others, and when they do, the attacks become a lot more dangerous since now they can deal a lot more damage than usual. But luckily their attacks will still be predictable and easy to avoid. Juggernaut. This enemy type consists of very strong fat men. You first confront them in the squats level, and with the exception of the running charge attack, most of the time they walk very slowly towards you. In fact, they are the slowest enemies in the entire game. But even though their attacks are very slow, they can deal a lot of damage, especially their grapple move. They are very hard to knock down and they have really good amount of health and structure bar. However, they do have a weakness. If you have a bad weapon, you can stun lock them by using the heavy attack combo. They will not have the time to attack back once you started. Flash kicks. These are always women. You first confront them in the club level. These, unlike juggernauts, have very low structure and health, but they make up for it by being very agile and avoiding a lot of your attacks. They mostly do very strong kicks that drain too much structure to block and that are very difficult to parry. It is better to try to avoid or dodge them. Just don't let yourself get hit by one of their kicks. You must especially be careful with their own sweep kicks, because they will make you fall in the ground and make you wide open to being kicked while you're down. So try to move out of the way as soon as possible. Disciples. These enemies are also found for the first time in the club level. In fact, they are the disciples from the boss character of the same level, Sean. They are very dangerous since they have some of the most powerful moves. Their attacks are harder to read and have a lot of variety in their moveset. They are clearly a far more trained opponent in martial arts than the previously mentioned enemies.
You must enjoy the taste of defeat.
Bodyguards. These are found in the museum first and are pretty much the most dangerous enemy types in the game, since they are a combination of some of the best aspects of the other enemies. They are really big and deal a lot of damage like the juggernauts. They even have a similar grapple attack, only that is a lot faster. But they also have really fast, hard to read and agile attacks like the disciples, so they will be able to avoid a lot of your attacks. They also have a lot of very strong red glowing attacks that deal a lot of structural damage like the flash kicks. Now comes the bosses, and while I am not going to say much about their specific qualities, I am definitely going to say that each one of them have a lot of unique abilities and techniques. They also have a lot of health and a second phase. They are the strongest opponents that you will encounter because they are made to put everything that you have learned in the levels to the ultimate test of skill. Also, each one of them have a unique special mystical power that will help them in their battle. They also don't have other enemies helping them. All of them are at one-on-one battle, which is good because you won't be overwhelmed by other targets and you can put all your attention into the boss. But it also means that you won't be able to refill your health until you reach the second phase, in which you will be fully healed. Also because you have to endure them for a long time, and since there is no way to reduce your death counter for most of the fight, this will probably be the point that will drain most of your age in the entire level. Fayard the Botanist. He is the first boss of the game, and he is meant to be a far more faster and experienced fighter than the enemies that you fought in the squads. He has a lot of unique moves that will take you by surprise if you are not careful. He uses the environment a lot to his advantage. will have to use parries and avoids correctly when needed to win. Be especially careful with his machete in his second phase since it is very fast. It can deal a lot of damage, and it hurts you even if you manage to block it. He also likes to hide in the bamboo trees and then suddenly ambush you.
Sifu, my arms are yours.
Leave. I recognize that uniform. It represents a school for the weak and feeble.
Sean the Fighter. He is the second boss and he is far more challenging because you will have to endure him for a lot more time, since he has way more health than the first boss, and he is extremely relentless. He has a very large and strong staff weapon, so you will have to learn to avoid his several and powerful consecutive attacks in a row and counter-attacking as soon as his attacks stop, which are the abilities that you had to use to survive against the flash kick and disciples that were introduced in the club. Luckily, in his first phase there are few staff weapons in the walls, but be careful, he will not give you time to pick them up. So try to stagger him first before grabbing one of those.
I do not want to fight you. That feeling of vengeance, it will not cease here. I speak from experience. Now leave, or be forced to.
Kuroki the Artist. If you already thought that Sean was surprisingly harder compared to Fajar, then Kuroki will shock you. She is an even higher scale in difficulty than the last time. She was so hard that I almost quitted the entire game just because of her. And what makes her so hard is that she has a very weird triple-ended bladed nunchuck weapon thingy that has a lot of range. And just like Sean, she constantly attacks you with several consecutive attacks. But unlike him, she very often targets your legs, making you trip and then finish you off by attacking you while you're down. In fact, she will very often change between direct attacks and lower attacks very fast just to confuse you. And also, since she has a bladed weapon just like Fajari's machete, she will hurt you even if you're blocking. If you haven't mastered the voids by this point, then you will be fucked. This was also the point where I most wanted to change the input of the voids, since, like I mentioned it before, you press L1 down for direct attacks and L1 up for lower attacks, which is confusing because you will instinctively press down when you see a lower attack. Luckily, I managed to deal with her eventually despite of this.
I know 100 ways to kill you. You should have run when she gave you the chance.
But that's just her first phase. In the second, while she doesn't do combination of directs and lower attacks anymore, which makes her a bit easier, she becomes a lot faster and throws you a lot of kunais from distance. Be especially careful for her really fast dash attack, since if you don't manage to avoid it, then it will do a lot of damage. She also has a lot of health and leaves you very few openings to attack her. Jing Feng, the CEO. In this case, the difficulty actually scales down a bit for once, because she's basically very similar to Kuroki's first phase, but the difference is that she has far more range of attack with her weird magic bell weapon thingy. So you're probably wondering, then why she's easier than the previous boss? If anything, that sounds even more difficult. But that's because by having a lot more range, the wind up of the attack is far slower, making her attacks far more telegraphed than Kuroki. Not only that, but her series of attacks are not as nearly as many and as relentless as Kuroki or even Sean. Even though she has the most range out of all the bosses, it is not that hard to close the distance, even if she tries her best to stay away from you. And she doesn't even have that much health anyways. However, despite the slightly disappointing fact that she's easier than the previous boss, Jin Feng is still a challenging and very fun boss to fight against. Yang the leader. The level up for him it is quite short and easy compared to the previous ones. You might even say that it seems a bit underwhelming, but that's because they don't want you to lose too much lives in the level, since Yang is by far the hardest boss in the entire game. He's incredibly fast, he can dodge and avoid most of your attacks. He has an incredible amount of health. His openings for counterattacks are incredibly small. He has a lot of your moves. Some of his attacks are not very telegraphed and are hard to predict. His combos can deal a lot of damage and focus attacks don't even work on him. You will have to use everything that you have learned until this point to defeat him. No cheat tricks or mystical powers here. Just pure martial arts and fighting skill. So remember, don't give up even if you lose a lot of times. Learn his moveset and figure out when to block, parry, avoid or dodge his attacks.
After 8 years of training,
Once you beat him, most of the other opponents in the rest of the game won't be such a big deal anymore. You will really feel like you just have conquered the hardest challenge in the game. Talk is not over yet. Now comes the spare run, but we will talk more about that later. Since we just talked about the bosses, I would like to take the time to talk about the boss teams. I haven't talked about the music of the rest of the game so far because it is mostly fine. It works as for what it is intended to do, but the boss music is absolutely fantastic. They all have their unique theme for each of their phases. They work really well, making the fight feel more intense, and they fit the personality and general theme of the boss incredibly well. My two favorites will be Sean's first phase theme and Jing Fei's second phase theme. I will also briefly mention the graphics since I forgot to talk about them before. They are not hyper-realistic and far more stylized than most modern games, looking like a very polished PS2 game with far more polygon capability, which I like. And also, since it doesn't stress too much your console by rendering too many gross hyper-realistic skin pores and wrinkles in a human face, or useless ray tracing puddle reflections. It runs very smoothly. Wish more games did stuff like this. Now let's talk about the level design. They're very varied and at times very surreal, mostly because of the constant change in scenery, done by the mystical powers of the boss's characters. At one point you can be walking around in a neon dance club setting and then suddenly you will find yourself into a burning city. Sometimes you might be in an art gallery, then go into a surreal painting, and then go into a snowy mountain, or go from a building into an underground cave. This drastic change in environments are not directly explained in the cutscenes, which is why previously I said that the story is sometimes intentionally unclear. The club is the first time that this drastic change in scenery happens in the middle of the level. Before, it only happened in the second phase of the boss fight with Fayar. So in each level you must be prepared for anything that the game might throw at you. While some people might not like that these changes are not explained in the cutscenes, you must have in mind that there's only 5 levels in the entire game. So this is a good excuse to give a lot of variety in the environments. Because of this, the level designs always stays fresh, and you never get tired of one environment as it keeps changing the more you advance the level. But when it comes to the gameplay, the levels have a far more complex design that traditional beat-em-ups usually have. The first time you arrive to a level, there's a very clear linear path that you have to follow until you reach the boss. But if you manage to get certain key items like so-called numbers, keys or a keycard, on a second playthrough you can skip several sections of the levels by opening a door that had been locked before, creating a shortcut. This means that if you replay the levels you can save a lot of lives for the boss and the later levels. But be careful, more shortcuts mean fighting less enemies, which means less score and XP gain that you could use to get some upgrades and skills in the shrines. Sometimes some key items for one level shortcut might be in a previous level, or in a later one, and sometimes some key items might not get you to a shortcut directly, but instead they will allow you to get another key item. Sometimes you might need to get several key items to get the one for the shortcut, but don't worry. If you go to previous levels, you will still keep all the key items that you have gotten up to that point. But it might be a bit complicated to get all the key items without using a guide. Also, remember when I said that you can unlock the skills permanently? Well, if you go back to a previous level, you get the amount of lives that you had when you arrived to that level. But why is that different from just reloading a previous save point? Well, when you unlock a skill permanently, you will still keep the skill in your arsenal when you go back to a previous level, which means you can complete it while being more powerful when you first got there and losing less lives. Yet another reason to replay levels. And lastly, I will talk about the arena challenges, the newest biggest addition, and these are meant to be done after you beat the game. Though, in my opinion, they work as a good distraction from the story, since plenty of times you might get stuck in a complicated area of a level or in a difficult boss. So instead of constantly replaying the same level over and over again, you could just iron out your abilities by trying some of these challenges. Besides, several of the early challenges are not nearly as hard as some of the later levels of the game anyways. This is how they work. You start by being able to choose between 5 different challenges, and if you manage to complete them in, let's say, a short amount of time if it is a time trial, or getting a certain amount of score, and then depending on the challenge you will get granted a token, and if you get an even bigger score you will get another token. You can get at least 3 tokens for one challenge, and once you get 5 tokens, you will be able to access 5 more new challenges. And if you get 5 more, you will be able to access the next set of 5 challenges, and repeat the process until you have unlocked all of them. Many of these challenges consist of very simple stuff, like defeating a certain amount of waves of enemies, surviving for a certain amount of time, or, like I said before, getting a certain amount of score. But sometimes you might have to do it with a disadvantage, like enemies doing double damage, or, like I'd said before, not gaining health with takedowns, or you can't use focus attacks. But maybe you might get an advantage, like having all the shrine upgrades, or double the amount of health, or maybe you can't die. Sometimes the rules of the challenge might be something very specific to make you rely more on a certain aspect of the game, or to use a certain ability more often to win, like having an indestructible weapon. Or maybe you can't even pick up weapons at all. Sometimes some of these rules can give an interesting spin to the gameplay, forcing you to change your playstyle to fit these conditions. Like, you can't hurt enemies unless you do environmental damage. This could work very well to practice those abilities and get better at using them. Some challenges have a fixed camera angle that follows you around. It reminds me of some classic hack and slash games like Devil May Cry or God of War. Well, this is certainly nostalgic. Just like in those games, sometimes the camera angle might be too far away, so it might be hard to read your opponent's attacks from that long distance. Another interesting aspect of these challenges that you might have noticed is that many of them are direct reference to many popular Kung Fu movies, like The Raid, Oldboy, Kill Bill, and even The Matrix. But while we are at that subject, some of these challenges work very well, but others not so much. Like one inspired by The Matrix called You Are the One. In this challenge, every time you block, the time will slow down. This might sound like it is a good thing, but actually all it does is screw up the timing of each attack from the enemies that you have been trying to learn the whole game, which just makes it more complicated for you to attempt to do parries or avoids. Also, since you don't have this slowdown ability on the rest of the game, you are not really practicing anything that will be useful later. Luckily, most of the rest of the challenges work really well and are very fun to do, so it is worth to try them all out to see which one you like the most. So overall, I think they are a great addition to this game. One of my favorite challenges is the one where the bosses from the story make a return. It is fun to have to deal with them while they have help from weaker enemies. Though they are far easier than in the story, since for this challenge you have all the shrine upgrades. Also, it is weird to see the bosses being defeated by a normal takedown, like they were a regular enemy. And the stage design, it is very boring since it is just a colored empty void.
Really? You want some more? Shit!
Well, now it is time to talk about the last part of the game, the sparring second run. Here I will talk about the ending of the game, so beware of spoilers, because you see, turns out that in the story you are not supposed to take the path of vengeance by killing the bosses. So luckily you got a second chance for redemption and defeat them all again, but instead you spare their lives instead of killing them, and get back their talisman that each stole from your father. That it is also what gave them their mystical powers. You do this by tiring them out, and you do that by breaking the structure twice in their second phase, and then you will get the option to spare them. A good technique to do this is to bring a blunt weapon. I recommend you to get all the weapon upgrades in the shrines for this. Also doing a lot of blocking and parrying. Be careful not to drain all their health since this will kill them. Do this with every boss including Yang, but with him it will trigger his third phase. Defeat him and then you will get the game's true ending. But there's a little problem with this aspect of the game, particularly the narrative. You see, to defeat the bosses again and spare them, you still need to beat the level to get to them. And in there you do not have the option to spare the random thugs that you fight. And a lot of the takedowns that you do are absolutely lethal, and the game still incentivizes you to use them. This breaks the entire vengeance bad narrative that this part of the game was going for. And it is such a shame because until that point the story was really damn good. But I guess it wouldn't be a modern video game without some ludonarrative dissonance. But to me this final mistake didn't ruin the story of the game entirely. I still enjoyed it. Well, I think that we already talked about every important aspect of the game. So here is my conclusion. The game works incredibly well. Very rarely does it have performance issues. The gameplay is fantastic, the level design is great, The enemies are done very well even if they lack in variety. The bosses are really good and serve well to test your skills to the limit. Your weapons are also great even though they also lack in variety. And I still think that some aspects of the gameplay could work a lot better if it had a lock-on. The levels can get repetitive after having to replay them so often. Maybe a Mega Man styled level selection with the first 4 levels, allowing you to choose between them at any time, could have worked better? I don't know. The story is very fun and interesting once you manage to discover all the secret lore. I just wish that sometimes you were rewarded with more than either shortcuts or secret lore info. Getting some new skills from exploring the levels could have been great. And though the game can take a while to beat, it is actually not that long. It only has 5 levels that you have to beat over and over again. Overall, the game it is great, but sadly it needs more variety and content in my opinion to fully be a masterpiece. The challenges certainly help, but it is not enough. And I know that it might be a bit too much to ask from an indie developer like Slowclap, but these aspects of the game could be improved in a sequel since they already have an incredibly good base here. I give this game an 8 out of 10. Okay, that's the end of this Sifu review. Hope you guys liked it. And since these were my first videos, feedback will be appreciated. Don't forget to share, like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. See you later guys!